It all began the moment I first sensed that something was off about our seemingly perfect family life. My inner voice wouldn't let me rest. My name is Ryan, and I had always believed that the relationship I shared with my wife, Emily, was built on love, trust, and mutual understanding. We met when we were young, and everything had seemed like a fairy tale filled with brilliant moments, laughter, and shared dreams of the future. Gradually, however, doubt crept in through small details. A furtive glance, long phone conversations, and sudden secretiveness when she went out shopping. At first, I dismissed these as mere signs of fatigue or minor misunderstandings, but with each passing day, the feeling of unease grew more tangible. I began watching her behavior, how she would suddenly close her eyes as if hiding something important, or steal a quick glance at the clock, as though trying to guard her time from me. These seemingly insignificant details began to coalesce into a dark hole, weighing heavily on my soul with uncertainty. Internally, I struggled between my faith in our love and the fear of losing everything dear to me. Memories of the happy moments we'd spent together in our cozy home now echoed as remnants of a bygone joy that might never return. I tried to find explanations, to rationalize what was happening, but every new detail only deepened my suspicions. The days passed in anxious waiting and dread, as I scrutinized her every move, sensing the inevitable disaster looming, even if it still lay hidden behind the veil of everyday normalcy. Every conversation turned into a test, every silence a tacit confirmation that something was amiss. My thoughts spun around a single question: why now, after so many years together? Had our dreams and desires, once so passionately nurtured, been lost under the burden of routine? Or was it that I saw a flicker of another's passion in her eyes, a passion that beckoned her into a world far removed from our familiar life? Nights became restless, consumed only by the thought of the secret behind every movement and word of hers. I began to doubt not only the sincerity of her feelings, but also my own ability to discern a truth so expertly hidden under a cloak of ordinary everyday events. These thoughts grew ever more powerful, prompting me to keep a diary in which I noted every minute detail of her behavior, clinging to the hope that one day these notes would reveal the undeniable proof of her infidelity and shatter the illusion of our marriage once and for all. I recalled the evening when, during a few hours of her unexplained absence, I noticed a strange name in her contact list: Jason. This was a name that had suddenly appeared on her phone, and with every passing day it became an obsessive refrain, a harbinger of doom. My doubts accumulated, and I found myself wondering, had I trusted her too much, or had I simply failed to pay attention to the subtle signals? The feeling of betrayal seeped into every fiber of my being, and I realized that unless I acted, sooner or later, the truth would surface and tear our lives apart. That was the moment I made the fateful decision. I had to find out the truth, even if it would bring pain and loss. My internal struggle had reached its peak, and I felt an unstoppable drive to uncover every secret buried in the dark corners of our past and present. I knew that every action had to be calculated so as not to arouse suspicion. Any careless mistake could jeopardize everything I held dear. In my mind, I was already constructing a complex scheme of observation, where every minor detail mattered and every inconsistency served as a harbinger of the inevitable discovery. In those days, I watched her as if I were a detective gathering evidence. I listened intently to her voice, tried to catch the subtlest shifts in her tone and mood, and analyzed her gestures and every change in her walk, determined to notice the slightest hint that might expose the betrayal. My personal journal became a veritable shrine to memories, each entry a brick in the edifice of truth I needed to construct to finally know whether my love had been unfaithful. Thoughts of betrayal infiltrated even the most hidden recesses of my mind, causing my heart to pound as if it were preparing for a blow of lightning. I kept asking myself, what was happening in her soul? How could someone else have forced their way into her heart and push aside all that I had? That question haunted me and robbed my nights of rest. Suddenly I began leaving the house earlier than usual, concocting urgent excuses so I could discreetly follow her. My emotions mingled with a fierce determination for truth. Even though I was afraid, I knew that only by doing so could I regain some semblance of peace, even if the truth turned out to be bitter. One cool autumn evening, as the light of the street lamps danced on the wet pavement, I finally took a bold, risky step. Out of nowhere, it struck me that my fears had morphed into something much greater. The desperate desire to capture that fleeting moment which would uncover the whole hidden secret. I parked near our house so as to discreetly observe Emily during her evening stroll. Guided by intuition, I chose the route I believed she would inevitably take. While waiting, time dragged on interminably, each second filled with the anticipation of a truth about to be unveiled before my eyes. At the moment I finally saw her silhouette shimmer in the glow of the streetlights, my heart froze. Emily walked with a confident stride, as if she were adrift in her own thoughts, completely unaware that she was being followed every step of the way by me. My inner dialogue was full of paradoxical emotions. On one hand, I longed to freeze time and capture every detail. On the other, I was painfully aware of the looming emotional danger of what I was about to witness. I waited for her to pause at the exit of our house so she could gather herself, and then I determined that the time had come to proceed to the next stage of my plan. The first few weeks of silent surveillance were tormented by anxious anticipation and excruciating tension. I repeatedly reassured myself that perhaps it was all just a figment of my imagination, a specter from the past without any real substance. Yet my intuition insisted that beneath Emily's calm exterior lay something more, a secret she guarded as if she were imprisoned by her own hidden truths, reluctant to share them and choosing instead to hide along well-worn paths. Every morning when she hurried off to work, I tried to catch a glimpse of her reflection in the mirror, or to see her handling her phone as if searching for answers to questions that lurked behind each of her actions. Step by step, I began to notice patterns that had previously escaped my attention. Each tiny clue slowly assembling a grim puzzle, the overall image of which became clearer every day. These observations turned into a kind of dark ritual filled with the bitter anticipation of betrayal. Before I realized it, I started deliberately choosing routes that would intersect with hers, playing a dangerous game where the risk of being caught was the inevitable price of truth. I continued to record every deviation from her usual routine, noting moments of long silence when she sat in her car as if lost in thought. Then, one rainy evening, when heavy clouds were racing across the sky, I noticed something so obvious that I had to hold my breath. Shortly after leaving our house, Emily veered off her typical route, heading toward the city where a modest, secluded motel lay hidden away. That moment marked a turning point, a push towards an ominous inevitability. I wasn't sure what awaited me there, but my heart was already signaling that the hidden truth was about to burst forth. With every passing minute, I felt that the moment would soon arrive when I could at last put a definitive end to this painful maze of suspicions and shattered hopes, a maze that had become a labyrinth without an escape. Thus began that fateful stage of my journey, when every moment was filled with uncertainty and the terror of an unavoidable truth, which in the haze of my suspicions was already coming into focus. I remember driving along the winding country roads, hoping to find a remote place where I wouldn't be seen as I trailed Emily. My mind was brimming with a cocktail of emotions: anxiety, anger, a crushing sense of betrayal, and, paradoxically, a quiet hope that perhaps knowing the truth would allow me to somehow fix everything. Behind the wheel, I felt like a player in a dramatic piece, where every second had meaning and every stop at a traffic light was a chance for a new revelation. Everything around me seemed soaked in an atmosphere of damp anticipation, with the rain, like tears from the heavens, beating on the windows, each droplet echoing in my mind. Suddenly I caught sight of a familiar silhouette against the blurred backdrop of a foggy city. Emily had driven into that unassuming motel outside the city limits and pulled up near a small entrance, lit by a weak neon sign. My hands clenched on the steering wheel, and my heart pounded so fiercely that, for a moment, I forgot why I had set out on that rainy evening. The street appeared deserted and enigmatic, as if inviting me to witness the unfolding events that were about to shatter my world. I parked my car at a discreet distance, careful not to be noticed, and cautiously stepped out into the cool night air that pierced every fiber of my being. With each passing moment, I drew nearer to the motel as if some sinister force were pulling me forward. Through the window of one of the rooms, I saw Emily's figure. She was seated, leaning against a table while talking on the phone. Her voice was soft, yet there was an unmistakable impatience mixed with tenderness, a tenderness that did not match her usual demeanor. Even then, a foreboding certainty gripped me that the answers to my agonizing questions lay behind that very window. I froze in place, straining to catch every word of her conversation, trying desperately to pinpoint the moment when sincerity would give way to deception. All my cherished memories, the recollections of our first meetings, the endless conversations when I couldn't believe how possible happiness was, began replaying in my mind like old film reels. Now, it felt as though all those moments marked the beginning of the end of what I once called love. Standing there, nearly paralyzed by a mix of anguish and dread, time itself seemed to stop. The night was hushed, with only the soft patter of rain like a mournful lament for broken hearts. In that moment, I understood that everything I had so carefully built throughout my life was crumbling beneath the weight of one devastating revelation. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the motel window where a drama I had long tried to avoid but ultimately couldn't prevent, was unfolding before me. With each pounding raindrop and every new sound emanating from that shrouded building, my inner certainty grew. That the dream I had so painstakingly nurtured was approaching its inevitable end. I knew that there was no turning back. My every future action would now be focused solely on discovering what drove my wife into the arms of another. That thought, as cold and piercing as an icy arrow, sank deep into my heart, making me tremble, yet also igniting a spark of resolve that nothing could snuff out. I understood that an insurmountable trial lay ahead, but I had already accepted it because deep inside I craved justice and my mind demanded clarity. On that night, beneath the cloak of the rainy gloom, I swore to myself that even if it cost me everything, I would uncover the truth, down to the very last drop of my blood. In that trembling moment, when I finally dared to step closer to the motel, it was as if reality itself slowed down, allowing me to observe every movement and emotion in slow motion. The darkness enveloped me, while my thoughts swirled in a vortex of anguish and determination, leaving no room for doubt. I felt as if fate were testing me with an ordeal that would never end until I emerged with a raw, unvarnished truth. I walked, each step infused with a fierce belief that even the most devastating betrayal could not break a spirit that remained pure and unyielding. At that moment, I could envision no turning back. Ahead lay an inevitable climax that would, like a storm, sweep away everything in its path, leaving nothing but the ruins of once cherished dreams and illusions. In the shadows, unseen, I watched the events unfolding in that motel. A storm of emotions raged within me, intensifying with every passing second. I felt as though I were waiting for the climax of a drama that would upend my world, and deep inside I knew that no sweetness of the past could ever wash away the bitterness of betrayal. Standing in the total darkness, I sensed time relentlessly marching on, a march that would never restore what was once so tenderly nurtured. I continued on my path, driven by a singular purpose, to pierce through the veil of deceit and confront the raw truth, no matter how cruelly it was revealed. Thus, my journey continued, carrying within me the unspeakable agony that sometimes becomes the sole compass when emotions are disintegrating in the wake of loss. I will never forget that night, when the rain washed away the last traces of deception, leaving behind only the cold residue of reality, a reality where truth grew scarcer and suspicion more abundant. I understood then that I could never return to the former life filled with boundless love and unwavering trust, that it was only one betrayal that could shatter even the strongest bonds. From that moment on, my fate was indelibly intertwined with the bitter knowledge that truth can be as merciless as betrayal. For in those final moments of waiting, I had not realized just how cruel life could be. When the motel door creaked open in a soft breeze, I felt as if time itself had paused. I stood still watching Emily, the glimmer in her eyes dimming in the weak lamplight, as I awaited the moment when all her hidden secrets would finally be laid bare. My heart pounded so fiercely that I struggled to muster the strength to take even a single step towards the inevitable. In that instant, when I had moved close enough, I noticed that Emily, as if sensing the approach of an uninvited presence, abruptly turned away from the window and began hastily gathering her belongings, as though preparing for a sudden departure. In that moment, the inner anxiety that had been building over weeks burst into flame, and I felt a shudder run through my entire body. Unable to contain the rising tide of emotion any longer, I approached the door of the room from which the muffled conversation emanated. In my mind, images of the happy days when Emily had been the gentlest and most sincere person flooded back, only now that happiness dissolved into the bitter premonition of betrayal. I crept toward the entrance, careful not to reveal myself, pressing my body against the cold wall as I inched forward in search of the truth that I knew awaited me. Step by agonizing step, my thoughts began to solidify, and I could almost see the moment when everything would be revealed in an instant, as though a curtain were slowly lowering over the stage of tragedy. Inside the room, fleeting fragments of a conversation, snippets of words filled with a passion and tenderness I once knew so well, seeped through. Every softly spoken word felt like a knife, slicing through the depths of my soul. It wasn't just the betrayal that tormented me, it was the realization that our entire life had been but an illusion, masterfully concealing a hunger for another's love. Every minute in that suspended moment felt like an eternity, and I knew that if I didn't act now, everything could vanish without a trace. I recall that on previous occasions, under the pretext of an unplanned walk, I had come close to this very place several times, always daring only to steal a furtive glance inside. But never until that night had I mustered the resolve to take a decisive step. Memories of our long conversations, shared laughter, and tender embraces now turned bitter with the pain of the present reality. I couldn't help but wonder into what the life we had once shared had transformed, and why the woman who had once exuded warmth and care had suddenly become a stranger. Every second of waiting, every sound, even the rustle of the wind, felt like a part of the symphony of betrayal, a soft whisper of fate foretelling an impending catastrophe. Feeling the internal pressure build to its peak, I resolved to take that decisive step toward the door, realizing that delaying any further would only deepen the agony that had already taken root in my soul. In my heart, there was no longer a shred of doubt. I had to know the whole truth, no matter how bitter it might be. With trembling hands, I reached for the doorknob and, summoning every ounce of will, softly knocked. That moment stretched on like an eternity, seconds filled with anticipation, fear, and the grim acceptance that there was no turning back, that the truth would soon strike with unrelenting force. Hearing Emily's muffled voice as the door inched open, I felt as if something inside me had irrevocably shifted. Memories of our best days, once intertwined with our shared dreams, collided with images I never thought I would witness. In her voice, there was an unmistakable uncertainty that only deepened my sense of the impending catastrophe. I realized that these moments spent in that ambiguous half-light would mark the beginning of the end for everything I had ever loved, and perhaps the start of a new, far more painful chapter in my life. At that moment, every week of clandestine observation, the restless nights, the endless notes in my diary, took on a horrific meaning, and I understood that fate had already sealed our destiny. My emotions, honed like a sharpened blade, were now dedicated solely to exposing the lie hidden behind that artful mask of deceit. I stood before the door, ready to confront whatever lay beyond, and with each passing second, my nerves tightened like a string poised to snap under the slightest touch. When the door finally opened a crack and Emily appeared before me, her eyes a mingling of despair and shame, the world around me seemed to freeze, leaving only an echo of shattered hopes and the inescapable sting of betrayal. Her words, torn from the depths of her soul, appeared as desperate attempts to recover what was lost, but I could no longer find refuge in them. In that moment, fragments of memories of blissful days when I believed that anything was possible, when we were one, flashed before me, only to vanish in the crushing reality. Her eyes shone with tears, and her voice wavered as she tried to justify her actions, to explain how everything had happened so suddenly, as if even she could not believe her own betrayal. Yet her words sank into the bottomless ocean of my grief and anger. I felt a wildfire of emotions erupting within me, fire powerful enough to consume every vestige of our old dreams. For in every phrase she uttered, there lay echoes of pain, shame, and fear. All too familiar, like reflections of the once bright hope we had shared. In the moments our gazes met, more than 1,000 unspoken accusations were exchanged. Every word she spoke, every attempt at justification, only deepened the wounds that had been inflicting my heart ever since I first heard the name Jason. In that instant, I felt all the pent-up emotions burst forth, a storm that obliterated the last remnants of my belief in love. Standing there, on the precipice of a shattered world, I understood that there would be no turning back. The truth, as bitter as it might be, had to prevail. I felt reality begin to warp around me, as if the universe itself decided to reveal every shade of pain I had never before known. The weight of betrayal crushed me, and in that darkness, one truth remained undeniable: the need to accept the reality, however raw and painful it might be. I realized that in this very moment, my inner world, all my dreams and hopes, entered into a desperate clash with the unyielding force of reality, which delivered nothing but the stark knowledge of irrevocable loss. After those fateful moments, I found myself standing on the threshold of a new and seemingly inevitable reality, a reality where every word and every glance carried the weight of the tragedy that had unfolded. In the darkness of that night, as the rain continued to tap the motel roof and Emily's voice slowly faded, I felt the full extent of the pain that had now become part of my destiny. It was as if time had slowed to a crawl, and in that silence, all I could hear was the pounding of my own heart, a heart heavy with sorrow and shattered trust. I remember how, during those moments when Emily tried to explain how everything had happened, her voice was imbued with a broken tenderness that had once been the very proof of our love. Now, however, that tenderness had turned into shards of icy betrayal, stabbing at my soul each time she searched for the right words to soothe the unbearable pain. I listened to her as if desperately trying to salvage any memory of the love that had once bound us. Yet instead I found nothing but one devastating question. Why? Why now? And why did it happen in such a way? Inside, my emotions were a whirlwind of anger and lost hope, merging into the sensation that the world I had known was about to disintegrate into dust. The fear of losing everything dear to me intertwined with the searing pain of betrayal, each second stretching into a torment beyond measure. I stood before Emily, and in her tearful, desperate eyes I saw not only her own suffering, but also the reflection of my own indelible wounds, wounds left in the wake of that terrible revelation. Every thought of our once blissful past, of our dreams and shared hopes, had been swept away by a violent storm of irretrievable betrayal. Even though a part of me wanted to run from the agony, I understood that confronting the truth was necessary for any chance at healing. In that moment, I realized that unless we embraced the change and addressed this deep-seated wound, our souls would forever drown in despair. We might attempt to mend what was broken, but the scars inflicted by betrayal were simply too deep for a simple forgiveness to heal. The conversation continued, and in that painful dialogue, I tried to piece together where the moments of shared happiness had vanished, and why my beloved woman, once the epitome of warmth, had suddenly become a stranger. Every passing second deepened my understanding that further talk would be futile. The truth had already announced itself in all its merciless severity. My heart demanded answers, and I could no longer remain captive to illusions, hoping that everything could be undone, like rewinding an old film. All that was left was to face reality and move forward, leaving behind a past that now existed only as a blurry memory. In that moment, as everything seemed irretrievably lost, I felt a new resolve forming within me, as if my inner spirit was being forged in the fires of passion and pain. I knew then that it was time to make a choice. Either let this betrayal consume me entirely, or find within myself the strength to break free from this vicious cycle of deceit and disillusionment and start again, even if the road ahead was scarred. I saw in Emily not only the echo of my own agony, but also traces of the woman I had once loved with all my heart. It became clear that perhaps there remained a spark of sincerity in her, one that, in another time, had made us fall in love. Yet the path to redemption would be long and painful. and I no longer knew whether I could ever forget what I had heard, whether I could summon the strength to forgive and begin life anew. Thus ended one phase of our story, leaving behind an emptiness in which the echoes of our arguments, tears, and unfulfilled hopes still resounded as a reminder, despite every attempt to hide the truth, it always finds a way to emerge, like a rock etched by fate. I closed my eyes, trying to accept that fate had dealt its cruel hand, resigning myself to the irrevocable loss that had marked the beginning of the end. After everything that had transpired, I found myself in a state where words of consolation seemed meaningless, and feelings shattered into tiny fragments that could not be pieced back together. I had to come to understand that the love I once believed unbreakable had proved as fragile as thin ice under the pressure of the spring sun. Day after day, I searched for answers amid scattered memories, trying to piece together the shattered fragments of my broken reality. In the silence of my mind, there was but one voice, a voice heavy with grief, as inevitable as life itself. Every time I attempted to reconstruct a coherent picture from those fragments, they slipped away, leaving behind only unanswered questions, echoes of a void that suggested that perhaps true happiness existed only in our dreams, and that reality was indifferent to our desires. In the dark days following the confrontation with truth, when the world seemed gloomy and stripped of all meaning, I sought solace in solitude. The days turned into weeks and weeks into months, and it seemed as if time itself had become the only medicine to heal the wounds inflicted by betrayal. I tried to return to the rhythm of normal life, yet every corner of our home reminded me of that fateful evening when I saw Emily with Jason, when my faith in love and fidelity was irreparably shattered. The nights were the most tormenting. Under the weak glow of streetlights in my room, I replayed every small detail, repeatedly asking myself where I had lost the unyielding trust I once cherished so dearly. In every faded cushion and every worn mark on the old couch, it felt as though there was a reminder that happiness could be as fleeting as smoke carried away by the wind. In my desperate search for answers, I began dissecting every shared moment. I recalled the summer picnics, where we laughed, the long evenings spent discussing our future and how we once dreamed of a happy life together. But now those memories appeared as illusory images, disguising a bitter truth. My mind was enveloped in a chain of questions. How could such a transformation occur? What drove Emily to seek comfort in another's embrace, leaving me alone with my thoughts? And why had I not noticed earlier, failed to hear the soft voice that slowly faded in the labyrinth of her soul? Months later, wandering through the familiar streets of our hometown, I came to the stark realization that life continues indifferently, unconcerned with the suffering of one man devastated by loss. Yet within me remained the unhealed scar, the mark of betrayal that beat like the relentless rhythm of a heart, reminding me that even the brightest love can be snuffed out by the flames of infidelity. I sought comfort in friendly conversations, in chance encounters, but each such meeting only amplified the feeling of irretrievable loss. Day by day, I understood that a time would come, not only for forgiveness, but for letting go, a time when the past would no longer be a heavy burden, but merely a part of the arduous journey toward a new beginning. I began searching for solace in activities that once brought me joy, attempting to re-establish a connection with myself, only to be confronted each time with the stark reminder that without the answers to that fateful day, all would remain an inexpressible emptiness. In meeting other people, I tried to understand how it was possible for a love that once seemed eternal to dissolve into a mere shadow that haunted my every step. Each new morning brought small flickers of hope, quickly extinguished by the cold reality and the understanding that there was no turning back. Time, as if, slowly healed the wounds, leaving only painful scars at the edges and a residue of perpetual melancholy on my soul. I learned to live with this knowledge, with this burden that indelibly affected each day of my life. And although the fear of loss had become a part of me, I understood that I had to move forward despite the pain. That very pain became my teacher, a reminder of the value of the present moment, giving meaning to every day that I once took for granted. Looking back now, I realize that it was this pain that transformed me beyond recognition. It taught me to cherish moments of truth, even if they hurt, and to accept life in all its harsh, multifaceted reality. What I had experienced became the beginning of a new chapter for me. Although the scars had not yet faded, I finally gained the clarity that lent me the strength to move on, no matter what. I continue my journey, bearing deep scars, yet holding on to the hope that time will not only heal, but also bring the chance to find a new kind of love, one founded on honesty and mutual respect. May the pain of the past serve as a lasting lesson, a reminder that true happiness lies not in illusions, but in the willingness to embrace life in all its complexity and myriad forms. Thus ended my story, a story of love, betrayal, and the inevitable parting that left an indelible mark on both my heart and my soul forever.